So there are various examples of such adaptations that have happened according to the environment in which you live, according to the temperature, according to the pressure conditions, according to the availability of oxygen. Depending on all these factors, the organisms over a period of time evolve and adapt to these conditions. So if you look at this particular diagram, these set of pictures, these are some of the insects or organisms which have adapted themselves to survive. How? For example, monarch butterfly. To ensure that it does not get preyed upon, it tastes foul. And since its taste is foul, the organisms or the animals which prey on these kind of butterflies would not try to touch them. A better example, rather I would say, is viceroy butterfly. It does not do anything, it just mimics how monarch butterflies look. So by doing that, even this could be taken or confused as a monarch butterfly by the animals, and that's why maybe that they will not feed upon the viceroy butterfly. Then you have this basically is a caterpillar called as snake caterpillar. And what happens with snake caterpillar is that its shape changes to look like the head of a snake if you try to go near or try to touch it. So in that case, again, it has survived, or it has made sure that it has a mechanism that ensures that it survives its predator. All these organisms, animals have survived like this over a period of time. So next, continuing on the same discussion, the next thing that we need to discuss is what is habitat and what is niche. Now these two concepts, habitat and niche, are actually a little confusing because more or less they mean the same thing, but there is a small difference between the two. When I say habitat in very simple terms you can say is the address of an organism or home of an organism, natural surrounding of an organism. So this is what habitat is. So the area where an animal lives or is its home, usually an ecosystem or an area within an ecosystem. So habitat relates mostly to the non-living physical or chemical conditions of the area such as temperature, rainfall, salinity, sunlight, soil or elevation. So these kind of factors will basically be related to a habitat. Now in the same habitat, all the organisms do not have the same role. They have different roles. I mean, if you look at this particular picture, the flamingos feed by straining the mud through their bills. Dabbling duck feeds on plants. Avocets feed on the animals. Avocets feed on the insects. Oyster catchers prey on open shells. And plovers hunt for small insects. So if you look at this particular area, this is the same habitat, but each and every one of these birds that we have listed out here have different roles. They have different roles, and this is how you define niche. So we will come back to niche in detail. First, let's do a discussion on what is habitat. So first of all, when we discuss habitat and we say that yes, it is its natural surrounding. So first of all, when we say habitat and we say that it is the natural surrounding of an organism and the area where an animal lives or something that is considered as its home is called as habitat. Now, habitat plays a crucial role in preservation of biodiversity because habitat conservation is directly related to the conservation of species in its environment. The protection of habitat is more systematic and comprehensive way of preserving the species. So by protecting any given habitat, a host of species will automatically be protected. This is often more useful than trying to preserve a single species. So rather than trying to preserve a single species, what we need to try and do is that we conserve the habitat in which this species is found, so that not only this species will be saved, but first of all there will be other species that can be saved. Secondly, since it is in its functional role, it is in its natural surrounding, this particular species will have a higher chance of getting preserved. So the loss of habitat is the main cause of species loss in the world, and this is something which is very, very evident if you look at the things that have been happening in the last few years, or let's say last 100 years or so. For example, if you talk about preservation of the mangroves as a habitat, then it protects the plants and animals which are also associated with these mangroves. So it's easier for you to protect the plants and animals that survive there. Coming to the next concept, which is niche. So first of all, niche, as we discussed, we are not just talking about the natural surrounding, but we are talking about the occupation of the organism in its community. So this is what niche can be said to be. So a species niche is composed of its habitat plus the biological or living things found in the habitat. The living component of a habitat is called a community. The biological factors include location on the food chain, predator-prey relationship, and reproductive requirements that that particular individual has. So interrelationships and interactions are important aspects of niche. Interrelationship and interaction. These are the two key words which are associated with niche. Please remember this. So in other words, occupation, you can also say that it is the function of the organism in the ecosystem. So all these organisms will have their own roles. Apart from that, the temporal conditions that are there, for example, the cycle of day and night, the seasonal cycles, these also define the niche of an organism. Now, next discussion that we must have is about specialized versus generalized niche. And why we need this topic to be discussed is mainly because these are the factors which will define whether or not a species can survive for long. How? Specialized niche applies to the species which have very well defined or narrow physical, biological or chemical requirements for its survival. If an organism can only be found within a very limited or specific condition, it is considered to have a very specialized niche. Generalized niche applies to species which can exist in a broad range of conditions. Now, if I take an example, if you know, this is known as a dugong. Now, dugong is a threatened species. And why? You have to ask this. Because of its niche. Now, what happens is, dugong has a very specialized niche. It requires seagrass. It requires seagrass for its survival. Problem is, with rapid industrialization and development, we have seen a decline in the amount of seagrass that is there in that area. Now what happens is, since seagrass is required, seagrass is absent. Because of absence of seagrass, dugong is facing a threat. So this is what happens. So animals such as dugong, which have very specialized niche, are more susceptible to extinction than an animal which would have a very generalized niche. So generalized niche applies to species which can exist in a very broad range of conditions. Humans are best examples of species with generalized niche. You have other animals also which have generalized niche. You can talk about rats, cockroaches. So these kind of things, even flies you can talk about. So it's very funny that humans can be clubbed in the same bracket as rats, cockroaches or flies, because all these are organisms which can survive in any kind of niche, or they have generalized niche. Next, niche and ecosystem changes. Why we are discussing this? Understanding of the niche of species within an ecosystem will be very, very important, which will provide us insights to what can be the consequences of the change of a habitat or niche of an organism. So two of the more common changes are the elimination of species and introduction of exotic or foreign species, which is called as invasive species. Now, removal of a species, whether through extinction or through habitat loss, can have many undesirable effects. Another case can be pesticides. What happens with pesticides? Whenever you spray a pesticide, you'll definitely kill the harmful insects, but as well as the beneficial ones also get killed in the process. So the result of spraying pesticide can be removal of a very important predator of an harmful insect, and that's why it can actually increase the population of pest in that area. So all this is a possibility. So that's why understanding the niche of various organisms in a given habitat will help us understand the effect of change that happens in that given area. So the introduction of these two, that is an exotic or foreign species, non-native species, can also become very dangerous for organisms. So let's say if the introduced species is known to be very resilient and competitive and has a very generalized niche, there is a possibility that it will take over, or it will not let any other species which has specialized niche to survive. So that can happen to the native species. And there are many such examples. We'll just come to it in some time. So if I have to conclude and summarize what is the difference between habitat and niche, first of all, understand that habitat is a place or a part of ecosystem occupied by a particular organism. The role of an organism within its environment or ecosystem will be called as its niche. So it is a physical place, and it is the function or activity of the organism. Reflects the living place of an organism, reflects its biotic and abiotic association with the environment in terms of its diet, reproduction, and other activities. So this is how we can differentiate between habitat and niche.